Rivers hide countless secrets in their depths. They conceal the chilling evidence of tragedies and crimes. This is exactly what the residents of a small town witnessed when, on one gloomy day, the waves washed ashore the body of a young teenage girl who literally had no face. Yes, you heard that right. This story took place in the small town of Waurika, located in a remote southern region of Oklahoma, USA. It's a quiet place with a population of about 2,000 people, where everyone knows each other. Life here flows smoothly and unhurriedly. In the fall of 1996, one of the homes in Waurika was occupied by the rich family, Gail the mother, Dwayne the father, and their 4 children, 3 boys and a girl named Heather, who at the time of these events was a sophomore in high school. Heather was not only an excellent student, but also a cheerleader. She had grown into a true beauty and attracted attention wherever she went. The girl had a kind nature, but was quite adventurous when it came to having fun. At 16, Heather was in her rebellious phase and wanted to try everything in life. On the evening of October 2nd, 1996, an argument arose between Heather and her mother over a $300 phone bill the girl had racked up chatting with her friends. Gail was upset by her daughter's wastefulness, while Dwayne took the situation more calmly. The thing was, the family was going through tough financial times. Heather's father, an electrician, had recently been severely injured in a transformer explosion. The man barely survived and required prolonged treatment and skin grafts. He couldn't work, so his wife had to take on an extra job to keep the family afloat. Every dollar counted, as expensive surgeries lay ahead for the father. The mother tried to explain to Heather that she couldn't afford to pay bills amounting to hundreds of dollars every month and to instill in her daughter respect for money, for elders, and the desire for independence. However, the teenage girl had a hard time accepting these admonitions, which led to a serious quarrel. When tempers cooled, Heather decided to go to bed. She went down to the living room, where she wished her father good night. Passing by her mother, the girl demonstratively remained silent, making it clear that she was still offended. On this sad note, all the family members retired to their rooms. The next morning, October 3rd, Gail, as usual, woke the children up for breakfast. But Heather didn't come out for a long time, and her mother attributed it to teenage resentment. The woman was sure that eventually hunger would force her daughter to come downstairs, despite her rebellious mood. But the girl never showed up. When Gail lost patience and went up to Heather's room, she was surprised to find no one there. Cell phones were not so common back then, so Heather didn't have one. The worried parents called all of their daughter's girlfriends, but none of them knew where she might be. Such behavior was completely unlike Heather. She had no mental issues and had never run away from home before. Moreover, the girl always took great care of her appearance and was unlikely to go anywhere for long without a change of clothes and makeup. But all her things were left at home. Gail and Dwayne wasted no time and headed to the sheriff's office in Waurika to report their daughter missing. The mother told about yesterday's argument with Heather, during which the woman reproached the girl for the huge phone bill and the stubbornness with which she refused to admit her guilt. The parents felt that their daughter's endless chats with her friends were going beyond reason. And although Dwayne was generally calmer, he supported his wife on this matter. The sheriff tried to reassure the worried parents, assuring them that the girl had probably just run away from home, as teenagers often do, especially after a fight with their parents. But Gail and Dwayne knew this was out of character for their daughter. Heather usually didn't run from problems, but tried to find a compromise, even after conflicts. Unfortunately, this time the mother's fiery reaction and the girl's lack of restraint, who couldn't admit her mistake, led to an unfortunate situation. Despite the parents' concerns, law enforcement officials assured them that most such situations resolve themselves. Teenagers who have run away from home usually come to their senses quickly and return to their families. It was quite possible that while Gail and Dwayne were at the sheriff's office, their daughter was already back home. The officers tried to reassure the worried mother and father, assuring them that everything would be fine. They explained that for a girl to be declared missing, at least a day must pass without any contact. Since the specified time had not yet elapsed, the police could not accept the statement and sent the couple home to wait for news from Heather. Disappointed by the attitude of law enforcement, Gail and Dwayne felt that something had happened to their daughter and decided to start their own search in town. First of all, they decided to talk to the girl's closest circle and contacted several of her friends. Among them was 17-year-old Randy Wood, the captain of the school football team, whom Heather had previously dated. Although their romantic relationship quickly ended, the young people remained friends. By the way, it was with Randy that the girl had recently run up a huge phone bill. When the mother of the missing girl called the boy, he said he had no idea about Heather's whereabouts or what could have happened to her. Despite his seemingly convincing tone, Gale felt that Randy was hiding something. He seemed to be repeating a rehearsed story, like a robot, and wasn't at all worried about the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, which seemed suspicious. However, Randy could not be caught in a lie, so Heather's mother decided to contact another friend of her daughter, another 17-year-old high school student named Josh Bagwell, whom she had recently started dating. When the woman called Josh, his grandmother picked up the phone. She said that the boy was resting after a party and she didn't want to wake him up. The elderly woman categorically refused to call her grandson to the phone and admitted that she was just cleaning up the trailer in the yard where the schoolchildren had been partying the night before. When Gale asked about Heather, the grandmother replied that she hadn't seen the girl. Having received no useful information, the worried parents drove all over the county in search of at least some clues about their daughter's whereabouts. A day passed, but all efforts were in vain, so Gale and Dwayne went to the police station again. This time, law enforcement finally joined the search operation. A week passed, but no valuable information about the missing schoolgirl appeared. Given the time frame, hope of finding the girl alive was fading with each passing day. Later, while examining the outskirts on the border with Texas, police patrols noticed a body in the river, floating face down. It was half submerged in the muddy water, but people on the bridge noticed it. The skin of the unknown victim was covered with a thick layer of dirt, as if intentionally to make the body harder to see. When divers managed to pull the gruesome find ashore, something much more terrifying was revealed under the layer of mud. The mutilated victim had numerous traces of buckshot, indicating a point-blank shooting, probably from a shotgun. The face was so disfigured that it seemed impossible to identify the deceased at first glance. A forensic examination was needed. As a result of the investigation, experts established that the victim had been shot 9 times from close range, once in the back of the head and 8 times in the back. The body was literally torn to pieces and was in a terrible condition. Since only one person was listed as missing in the area at that time, Heather Rich's parents were called in for identification. They were able to identify their daughter only by the engraved name ring given to the girl by her mother. This dispelled any doubts. It was Heather lying on the morgue table. The identity of the deceased was finally confirmed by dental records, as forensic experts found non-removable braces in the oral cavity of the mutilated body, which the schoolgirl wore to correct her bite. The news of the young cheerleader's death spread like wildfire through the town and became the main topic of discussion the very next day. Within a few hours, all the local residents knew about the tragedy. Football player Randy Wood also found out about it, for whom the day when it all happened coincided with the annual match where he had been recognized as the king of the game for several seasons in a row. Usually, after such competitions, loud celebrations were held. But this time there was no room for fun. The boy was shocked by the terrible news about his ex-girlfriend and later went to the same bridge where the body was found. He stared into the murky waters for a long time, hiding a terrible secret from everyone. In fact, Randy knew much more than he told the parents of the deceased, and soon the investigation led the police to the boy and several of his friends. These events resembled the plot of a terrifying Hollywood horror movie. In the very heart of a small town in Oklahoma, 3 teenagers turned an ordinary evening into a bloody massacre. One of them was from a wealthy family, the second was a star of school football and the team captain, and the third was a novice street hooligan. As soon as the detectives took up the investigation, they first spoke with Heather's parents. By that time, Gale had already managed to call quite a few of her daughter's friends and acquaintances. Her suspicions fell on 2 young men, Heather's ex-boyfriend, 17-year-old Randy Wood, and her current boyfriend Josh Bagwell, who had arrived from a party and didn't even bother to call. The woman was convinced that the boys were hiding something. It seemed that the high school students were telling the same rehearsed story, with even the wording of sentences coinciding in places. However, they could not give a clear answer to additional questions, which seemed extremely strange. Noticeably nervous, the teenagers were reluctant to make contact, unlike Heather's other friends who actively joined in her search. Gale intuitively felt that Randy and Josh knew much more than they were saying in their telephone excuses. Talking to classmates and other friends of the deceased, investigators received several leads indicating that Josh and Randy had information about the events of that fateful night when the girl ran away from home after an argument with her mother. Later, it turned out that Heather had indeed intended to go to a party to meet her boyfriend Josh. Despite her parents' ban on leaving the house late in the evening, this did not stop the rebellious schoolgirl. After waiting for Gail and Dwayne to fall asleep, she jumped out the window around 11 p.m. There, those same two suspicious young men, well known in the city and popular among local youth, were supposed to be waiting for her. Josh was considered a rich heir to wealthy parents. He always drove the coolest cars and wore the most stylish clothes, willingly demonstrating his family's wealth. This boy was a typical representative of the golden youth, who cared only about his own popularity and money. In contrast, Randy Wood came from a simple family, but thanks to his talent and perseverance in sports, he gained no less fame than his wealthy friend. Friends adored the handsome team captain for his virtuoso play on the field. For his merits, he became the best football player not only in the school but in the whole city, and even gained popularity among school teams at the state level. Randy and Josh were inseparable and usually spent their weekends driving around in Josh's car on dirt roads. Of course, girls could often be seen in their company. The boys regularly drank alcohol and sometimes smoked marijuana. Due to the lack of entertainment facilities for young people in the town, the teenagers simply had nothing to do, so they improvised as best they could. It is known that Heather Rich often spent time with this company. A friend said that the girl had also tried weed and alcohol with them, and on the night before her disappearance, she ran away to hang out with the popular boys. This news shocked the parents of the 16-year-old straighter student who had taken such a slippery path. Although the couple was aware of their daughter's propensity for risky experiments, they had no idea that this was happening in the company of young men. As it turned out, 5 days before the disappearance, on September 27, 1996, Heather herself and another girl from the support group were caught in a corner of the stadium. Marijuana and smoking paraphernalia were found on them. It also became known about alcohol consumption. Because of this incident, the schoolgirls were suspended from classes for 3 days. The teachers informed Gail and Dwayne about everything, and they did not hide their indignation, as they never expected their 16-year-old daughter to get involved in such dangerous experiments. Heather admitted that she tried the prohibited substances out of curiosity and promised to stop. However, the parents were more concerned about something else: why a diligent student and athlete had taken this wrong path at all. The young girl's attraction to alcohol and drugs was frightening. Despite their daughter's assurances that she would give up her bad habits, Gail and Dwayne were never able to verify her sincerity. Instead, these harmful passions probably had a direct relation to her death. The detectives decided to talk to Josh and Randy, with whom the murdered schoolgirl was last seen. They hoped to find out the details of the party that preceded Heather's disappearance. The captain of the football team admitted that he and his friend were in a trailer behind Josh's house, playing dominoes and drinking all evening. However, both boys denied any contact with Heather that ill-fated evening. Interestingly, the police noticed the same details that had alarmed the mother of the deceased. Both young men told exactly the same story, as if reciting a memorized text, and spoke mechanically, like robots. Moreover, they showed practically no emotion, even though it was about the death of their mutual friend. Such behavior convinced law enforcement officers that the teenagers were lying. They suspected that the murder could have happened out of jealousy when the young men couldn't share the girl between them. Of course, at that point, the investigators did not yet have strong evidence that would directly link the high school students to the crime. However, the strange behavior of Randy and Josh reinforced the police's doubts about their possible involvement. Both ended up as the main suspect, so it was necessary to study their biographies, relationships with Heather, and the circumstances of the party that took place on the eve of her disappearance more carefully. The autopsy results provided new food for thought. First of all, attention was drawn to the number of shots, as many as 9. Even police shotguns usually hold 8 rounds in the magazine. Why would someone reload the weapon to fire an additional shot when the victim was obviously already dead? Another interesting detail was the type of ammunition used, the so-called double buckshot. These powerful cartridges have excessive lethal force for executing a 16-year-old girl. Fortunately, such a specific choice by the criminal helped the investigation make its first serious breakthrough. These rare rounds were sold in only one store in the city. After checking the receipts, the police found out that only one person had purchased them shortly before the murder. The seller recognized in the photo the very suspected young man, high school student Josh Bagwell, who had come to the store and bought a whole box, that is, 20 rounds. According to the store employee, another young man was with Josh, but not his best friend Randy, but a certain Curtis Gamble, a guy well known to the local police. As it turned out, Curtis was the oldest among those involved in the case. He was already 19. Despite his young age, he had already been arrested several times and had spent most of his conscious life in juvenile detention centers. This guy was completely inadequate and had repeatedly come to the attention of law enforcement. He was caught drunk driving, shooting his gun at dogs, horses, or even random passers-by. Therefore, Curtis himself fell under the greatest suspicion, unlike the other two young men who, although they behaved strangely, had never had problems with the law before and had never been considered aggressive or dangerous. On October 23rd, the police visited the home of the juvenile offender in a neighboring town where he lived. But even more important was the fact that just a few kilometers from his home was the same bridge under which the fishermen stumbled upon the mutilated body. Curtis himself was not found at home, but the law enforcement officers spoke with his grandmother. The woman told about her grandson and, among other things, mentioned that he knew the area well and often visited the bridge in question. Curtis had loved to fish there since he was a kid, and the elderly woman had taken him with her more than once. So it turned out that the boy had a much closer connection with the crime scene than the police could have assumed before talking to his grandmother. The next day, the detectives managed to meet with Curtis himself. The young man was detained and taken to the sheriff's office in Waurika. The interrogation lasted more than 8 hours, but the suspect essentially did not say anything, although he agreed to take a polygraph test. But even this did not become the main find of the investigators. Curtis's most valuable confession concerned his possession of a rather rare type of firearm, a Mossberg shotgun, a special feature of which is a magazine for 9 rounds. Thus, the detectives suggested that they had stumbled upon the owner of the likely murder weapon, as Heather had been shot with that very type of gun. When the weapon was seized and a ballistic examination was assigned, experts officially confirmed that the schoolgirl had been shot with Curtis's shotgun. After being presented with evidence of his involvement in the murder of the young cheerleader, the boy gave in. He told the police that he had dragged 2 of his friends, Randy and Josh, into this crime, after which he wrote a detailed 2-page confession. 3 weeks after Heather's death, law enforcement finally had a suspect who had confessed to the crime. Given the likely complicity of the other young men, Randy and Josh were also arrested and brought to the station. The schoolboys were shown Curtis's testimony, where he claimed that he himself had initiated the massacre of the girl, but Randy had become the direct perpetrator. According to the confessor, he had given his shotgun to his friend and ordered him to shoot the innocent victim, while Josh had simply been present. However, the police were skeptical about this testimony, since the football team captain did not fit the image of a typical criminal. In the past, the young man had never had any problems with the law, had been an exemplary student and a successful athlete, popular among his peers. No one had ever spoken badly of him. Considering the geography of the events, the party took place in southern Oklahoma, and the body was found in Texas. The boys faced trial in this particular state, where the death penalty is prescribed for murder. This became a key problem for the investigation, as under local laws, the actual perpetrator could end up in the dock. Therefore, none of the suspects wanted to take the blame for the fatal shot. Only after persistent attempts by the police and a second meeting with the investigators did Randy finally begin to testify. However, he categorically denied his direct participation in the murder, claiming that Curtis had been the shooter and the initiator of the massacre of Heather, and Josh had simply helped him. For his part, Josh refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Thus, in October 1996, the detectives received 2 confessions that contradicted each other in many aspects. In the end, the investigators concluded that Randy's testimony seemed more truthful, and he had also successfully passed a lie detector test. It became clear that it would hardly be possible to establish the exact sequence of events on the fateful evening of October 2nd with 100% certainty, but it was decided to rely on the information provided by the football team captain. According to his confessions, that day Randy had planned to drink with his friends Curtis and Josh. When they gathered, it turned out that Heather was supposed to join them. The girl knew Josh and Randy himself well, but had never met Curtis before, so she had no idea how dangerous a guy he was. When all 4 of them got together and had a good drink, Heather, like the rest of the company, found herself on the verge of losing consciousness. It was at this moment that Curtis, drunk, got the idea to take advantage of the girl's helpless state and abuse her. He immediately proceeded to act. As Randy recounted, Heather woke up from the harassment and screamed, pushing the attacker away, and then fainted again. Despite the fact that she could barely move her tongue, Curtis got scared because even a half-drunk victim could remember everything when she sobered up. He knew very well that rapes are met with an unfriendly reception in prison, and he did not want to end up behind bars because of this incident. Therefore, he suggested simply getting rid of the girl. The younger boys initially took these words as a bad joke, but Curtis was not joking. He really took a shotgun out of the trunk of his car and pointed it at the three teenagers. Randy and Josh realized that they were dealing with an extremely unpredictable guy, so they decided not to argue. They loaded the helpless schoolgirl into the trunk of Josh's car, and the whole company headed towards Curtis's house. But a few kilometers from the destination, the older boy ordered them to turn to the bridge where the victim's body was later found. Curtis forced his friends to stop in the middle of the bridge, get Heather out of the trunk, and put her by the railing. Fearing for their own lives, Randy and Josh obeyed. When the unconscious girl was pulled out of the car, she could not stand on her feet. The young men laid her on the ground and sat down in the car, not imagining what would happen next. Curtis walked right up to the helpless Heather and began to shoot her. Randy saw with his own eyes how a huge hole formed in his classmate's skull. He could not stand the gruesome sight, covered his face with his hands, and was afraid to even look in that direction. The attacker emptied the entire magazine of the shotgun into the victim, after which he and Josh threw the girl's mutilated body off the bridge. Getting into the car, the boys fled the crime scene. They saw with their own eyes what Curtis had done to Heather, so fear for their own lives made them keep silent. In October 1996, the three young men were officially charged with the abduction and murder of 16-year-old Heather Ridge. The investigators had the hardest time working with Josh Bagwell, who refused to testify and against whom, in fact, there was no direct evidence of involvement. The prosecution had to rely solely on the words of the other two defendants in the case, which contradicted each other. Due to the lack of physical evidence, the evidence base was not very reliable. To remedy this situation, the prosecutor offered Randy Wood a deal with the investigation. In exchange for testimony against Josh, the young man was promised life imprisonment with the right to parole after 30 years. Randy immediately agreed. The prosecutor's office also discussed with Heather's parents the possibility of a similar sentence for Curtis. In the opinion of the victim's family, the most important thing was to get truthful testimony from him, and not to send the underage organizer of the murder to the death penalty. The Rich family first and foremost wanted to know the truth. On October 15th, Curtis accepted the prosecution's offer and pleaded guilty in exchange for life imprisonment without the right to early release. At the same time, during the trial, he continued to behave defiantly and inadequately. While in custody awaiting trial, Curtis once attacked a guard, knocked him down, and began to strangle him. The enraged prisoner was subdued only by the joint efforts of several police officers. In February 1998, almost a year and a half after Heather's tragic death, the trial of Josh Bagwell began. The case had gained such notoriety that there were so many people eager to attend the hearing. In the end, access to the courtroom was restricted, with both random spectators and members of the press barred from being present. The defenders of the accused resorted to various attempts to justify their clients. In fact, the lawyers tried to tarnish the reputation of Heather herself, portraying her as an alcoholic and a loose woman who had allegedly entered into an intimate relationship with Curtis herself and then began to threaten him with exposure, forcing the boy to resort to drastic measures. The parents had to defend the honor and dignity of their daughter. In reality, the girl was a diligent student, a talented athlete, and an extremely decent person who simply found herself in the wrong company and encountered a real criminal. The floor was given to Curtis. To the surprise of those present, he suddenly returned to his initial version of events, claiming that Josh had not participated in the crime at all and had not even been aware of the murder plans. Instead, according to Curtis, it was Randy who had fired the fatal shot. This testimony deeply affected Randy. Unexpectedly for everyone, the football team captain took a desperate step. He refused the plea bargain. The young man did not want his confession to be regarded as dictated solely by the desire to save his own skin. Accusing his accomplices right in the courtroom, Randy stated that he primarily wanted to achieve justice for the innocently murdered girl. This decision went against even the advice of the defendant's lawyer. Despite all the nobility of this act, Randy consciously risked ending up on death row. It was this selfless behavior of the young man that made a strong impression on Heather's parents. The couple even personally met with Randy after the court session. Such a bold and principled step was of great importance to the family of the deceased. On February 10th, Wood appeared before the jury and told the whole truth about the terrible events of that fateful evening. His testimony left no doubt. The young man described in detail the full participation of Josh and Curtis in the murder of Heather, as well as Bagwell's role in concealing the traces of the crime. On February 14th, Curtis Gamble was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and the intentional commission of this particularly serious crime. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with an additional term of 99 years. In May 1998, a meeting took place between Heather's parents and Randy as part of a live television talk show. Despite all the pain and sorrow of losing their daughter, the rich couple expressed sincere admiration for the honesty and deep remorse of this young man. On August 7, 1998, the trial of Randy Wood was concluded. He was also found guilty of involvement in the murder. The young man was sentenced to life imprisonment with the right to parole after 40 years. This decision saddened many people because Wood was the only one of the 3 defendants in the case who sincerely repented of what he had done and, risking his own life, decided to bring the truth to the jury. The prevailing opinion in society was that the boy did not deserve such a severe punishment. Josh Bagwell also suffered the fate of life imprisonment without the right to early release. He was sent to serve his sentence in the same correctional facility as Curtis. In January 2002, both convicts made a daring escape attempt, taking advantage of the night. They managed to hide in the state of Texas for 10 days. A nationwide search was announced. Eventually, the fugitives were caught and returned behind bars to continue serving their life sentences. On the morning of January 12, 2019, a report came in about the death of 65-year-old Michael Redlich. A well-known figure in certain circles, a former NBA executive with the Memphis Grizzlies and a respected professor at the University of Central Florida, he was initially thought to have died from a heart attack. However, when the ambulance arrived at the scene, it became clear that the cause of Mr. Redlich's death was a stab wound to the chest. Various theories were considered, including self-harm. Later, forensic experts concluded that the incident was a criminal act of taking a life. After some time, the perpetrator was identified. The person who helped Michael meet his fate turned out to be his beloved wife. In June 2022, she stood trial. But this story is not as simple as it seems. The woman did not admit her guilt in the intentional crime and often changed her testimony. The court battles between the prosecution and the defense were long and fierce, and the court's verdict came as a surprise to everyone present. So what really happened in the Florida suburb of Winter Park? Who is the real victim, and could the tragedy have been avoided? Let's figure it out together. In the dock is 46-year-old Danielle Redlich, a short, slender woman. Her chestnut hair has noticeably grayed, either due to the lack of opportunity to visit a hairdresser while being in custody for about 3 years, or because the gray hair is evidence of genuine emotional suffering and stress. Until 2019, she was an ordinary working American, a mother of 2 wonderful children. By profession, she was a multimedia communications specialist and not a widely known person. But after the crime against her own husband, her name made headlines in the media. This always happens when the dirty laundry of a seemingly respectable couple is put on public display. Danielle was born in 1976 in Florida. Soon after, her family moved to Cleveland, Ohio. The girl's childhood was typical in many ways. She grew up kind and well-mannered, with a creative streak. Danielle was the eldest child in the family. Over the years, her attraction to the beautiful only intensified. She first entered Valencia College, where she earned an associate's degree in the arts. Later, she continued her studies in the psychology department of Baldwin Wallace University. In 1996, Danielle's mother, Caitlin Aquina, remarried. However, this marriage lasted only 2 years, after which Caitlin succumbed to cancer. It turned out that the woman had been battling breast cancer for a long time. Thanks to her husband's comprehensive insurance coverage, she received top-notch medical care, which was the main reason for legally formalizing their union. Unfortunately, even high-quality treatment ultimately did not yield the desired results. After becoming a widower, Caitlin's husband not only lost his wife, but also became the sole guardian of her children. Since it was difficult for him to raise them alone, he turned to the deceased's eldest daughter, Danielle, for help. At that time, the 22-year-old girl was already living independently but responded to the call. So, after her mother's passing, Danielle, her brother, sister, and their stepfather, Michael Redlich, found themselves under the same roof. Yes, you heard it right. We're talking about the same Michael who later became Danielle's lawful husband and was brutally abused on a cold winter evening in 2019. For now, the couple's relationship was based on friendship. Danielle took care of the younger children and worked part-time at a bar. Michael was building his career in professional sports, engaged in player recruitment. He genuinely became attached to the children, who became closer to him than his own. He also felt comfortable with Danielle, Over time, she saw in him someone she could rely on. Despite the 20-year age difference, their communication was easy and natural. Gradually, the man and woman began to grow closer. Neither age nor status was an obstacle for them. Although initially, Danielle preferred not to publicize their relationship to her family, so for a while, they dated in secret. Next to his new chosen one, Michael felt younger in soul and body, and she felt loved and protected. Thanks to her husband's good connections, Danielle quickly found a new job at an advertising agency. In addition, he earned a decent income and devoted all his free time to the family. Overall, everything was going great for the couple. Some time passed, and Mr. Redlick received an extremely attractive job offer. He was offered the position of Vice President of Corporate Sales for the Memphis Grizzlies basketball club. But the new job required moving to another state. Without hesitating for a second, Michael suggested that Danielle go with him. However, she had doubts.
The girl didn't want to abruptly change her familiar way of life, and she was still studying. Therefore, she declined the offer. But the long-distance relationship continued, and the couple often met. Once, Michael showed Danielle the house he had purchased for them. This greatly impressed her. The cottage was located in a picturesque area near the Mississippi River, a quiet and cozy neighborhood. Eventually, Danielle did decide to move and start a life together. To dispel his beloved's last doubts, Redlick found her an interesting vacancy in the radio industry. Recalling those times, Danielle said that initially, everything was perfect, and only Michael's work later became a catalyst for change. Many years later, at the trial against her mother, the couple's 15-year-old daughter, Jaden, testified. She described what a wonderful father Michael was and how much he had done for the family. Together with her 8-year-old brother Sawyer, they attended one of the best schools. The children cherished dreams of a sports career, as their father encouraged and supported their endeavors in every way, enrolling them in specialized sections. Jaden felt a strong connection with her dad, which she couldn't say about her mom. In her eyes, Danielle was hysterical, manipulative, and sometimes a toxic person. The young lady sincerely believed that it was her mother who provoked all the domestic quarrels, while her father did everything possible to keep the family together and maintain harmony. But was everything really as the elder daughter saw it? And what actually caused the rift in this seemingly happy and close-knit family? Mr. Redlick's new responsibilities were accompanied by increased stress and responsibility, and relations with his bosses were tense. All of this had a negative impact on Michael. He became nervous and exhausted. To relax and unwind somehow, the man began to seek solace in alcohol. Later, this turned into a daily habit. Michael often stayed out late, coming home drunk and in a bad mood. A gloomy atmosphere prevailed in the house. Danielle tried to be a support for her husband, understanding his difficult state. It seemed that after talking to her, he would calm down a bit and promise to quit drinking. But these promises turned out to be short-lived. Once, Michael ignored a joint dinner they had planned, and this was far from the first time. But that time, the couple had specifically agreed to spend time together. Danielle was extremely upset and said that if he couldn't give her attention, he could have at least warned her so she could plan something else. Heading for the door, the woman made an ill-timed joke, which struck a nerve with Michael. He blocked her path and hit her in the face. The slap was so strong that Danielle staggered, and then she saw that her clothes and the floor were sprayed with blood. Shocked, she recoiled from her husband, who burst into tears and began to apologize. Obviously, Michael sincerely repented and immediately tried to make amends. He took his wife to a familiar sports doctor and told him what had happened. The medic examined the unfortunate victim, provided first aid, and then advised her to see a dentist and a plastic surgeon, as the injuries were quite serious. Danielle even lost a front tooth. The next day, Michael organized an unforgettable dinner and was very attentive and caring. Undoubtedly, his wife forgave him and didn't report the incident anywhere. The state had strict laws regarding domestic violence, but Mrs. Redlick took pity on her husband and decided not to create extra problems for him. In fact, this was not the first alarming sign. Danielle had already encountered similar behavior before. The incident occurred when they were living together in Cleveland. At a concert, Danielle was talking to an ex-boyfriend, which aroused jealousy in Michael. On the way home, he made sarcastic remarks about it. Danielle responded in kind. Suddenly, Michael hit her and then immediately apologized, explaining his action by saying that she had hurt his feelings. Danielle forgave her partner, taking some of the blame herself. Over time, the incident was forgotten. After all sorts of things happen in relationships. The year 2003 was special for the Redlick couple. Their first child, a daughter named Jaden, was born. And just a year later, the couple officially legalized their relationship. It was a bright and carefree period in their lives. Everything seemed to be going great. But despite this, Michael still had to deal with problems at work. There were personnel changes in the company, and he didn't get the promotion he had hoped for. 7 years passed, and the family was joined by another baby, a boy named Sawyer. The parents were fully immersed in raising their children. There was just one unfortunate circumstance: Michael's work. The level of tension was rising, and the man again began to drown his stress in alcohol. Quarrels in the family flared up more and more often. During one of them, Michael grabbed Danielle by the throat and pinned her against the wall.
The woman was horrified by this turn of events. This time, she couldn't endure the brutal treatment. Packing her things and taking the children, Danielle moved in with relatives. By the way, initially, they didn't approve of this marriage, but later came to terms with their daughter's choice. Michael visited her more than once, begging for forgiveness and pleading with her to come back home. After a while, they managed to mend their relationship. But the following years were like a roller coaster. The Redlick family changed their place of residence several times. The head of the family was offered a job in California, where they lived for about 5 years. This period could hardly be called cloudless. The man continued to struggle with his demons and couldn't get rid of the destructive drinking habit. And at one point, both he and Danielle found themselves unemployed and living off their savings. 2014 brought new changes, this time a move to Indiana. Fortunately, the prospects were encouraging. To find a place to live and settle all matters, Michael went there ahead. Danielle stayed in California with the children. They needed time to sell the old house and belongings. The constant moving took a lot of strength and energy. It was not easy for the children to adapt to the new conditions. The whole process dragged on for a whole year. During this time, the family's financial situation improved, but the marital relationship underwent certain changes. The distance and rare meetings did their job. Danielle and Michael grew apart, barely communicating. When the moment of reunion finally came, new challenges arose before them. At some point, Danielle suspected her husband of cheating. Michael became unusually cold and distant, and the former passion faded away. However, he found the strength to admit that the problem lay in his age and health. Previously, Michael was embarrassed to talk about it, fearing that he would lose his young wife. But Danielle appreciated his honesty and continued to support him as before. After trying a number of medications, the couple decided to try a course of hormonal injections. Testosterone injections helped rejuvenate Michael both physically and psychologically. It seemed that he had shed a dozen years, regaining his former energy and zeal. But along with this, his aggressiveness also increased. One evening, when they were watching a movie together, Michael dozed off. Danielle went upstairs to rest. And the next morning, when the woman was brushing her teeth in the bathroom, he burst in and hit her on the head. Michael justified his action by saying that she hadn't woken him up the night before. In response, Danielle stated that she was tired of all this and was leaving. These words only further enraged Michael, and he pounced on her, trying to strangle her. Poor Danielle couldn't even defend herself. She felt herself gradually losing consciousness. At one point, it seemed to her that this was the end. Some time passed, and Mrs. Redlick finally opened her eyes. Her husband was standing over her, frightened, confused, begging for forgiveness. Danielle didn't have the strength for conversation, so she just silently crawled away. After this incident, the couple continued to live under the same roof and raise their children together. But their relationship underwent drastic changes. It seemed they had reached a point of no return. Michael began to drink even more often, and quarrels in the house flared up at every turn, even over trifling reasons. The instances of the man's irritation turning into physical violence became more frequent. But no matter what, Danielle didn't leave him. As much as she was dissatisfied with the situation and resented Michael, her love for him didn't fade. All these upheavals couldn't help but affect Danielle herself. She became nervous, irritable, and withdrew into herself. To somehow abstract herself, the woman immersed herself in photography. And although most of the couple's conflicts didn't go beyond the house, their family still maintained a respectable appearance. Closer to the end of 2014, the Redlicks finally settled in Florida. This time, Michael, tired of constant stress, decided to radically change his career. He got a job as the Director of External Relations and Partnership Programs at the University of Central Florida and began teaching. Although they paid less there than in the NBA, the work brought satisfaction and stability. Initially, the family rented a place to live, but a year later, they purchased their own house in the picturesque Winter Park area. Their new family nest was impressive in its scale, a spacious Mediterranean-style home where Danielle claimed the attic floor. It became a kind of refuge for her, where she often spent nights, especially when Michael was seized by fits of rage. Testosterone injections not only rejuvenated her husband, but also revived the couple's intimate life. But even during intimacy, he could behave roughly. Their relationship remained tense and unstable. Against the backdrop of all these experiences, Danielle found solace in alcohol and gradually became addicted to it. Michael continued to work, providing for the family, while Danielle took care of the children and the household, increasingly closing herself off. Numerous quarrels and feuds eventually led to the couple divorcing in 2016. However, despite everything, the father never stopped seeing his children, financially supporting them and paying the bills. By that time, Danielle had already gotten a job at a school. New acquaintances helped her get out of her depression, and her work duties restored her sense of self-worth. However, she was still continuing to see Michael. He could come and go as he pleased. During one of these visits, an argument flared up again, after which Danielle ended up in the hospital with a head injury. As before, the woman kept silent about the true circumstances of the incident, fearing she might harm her husband. But this time, Michael took her silence for granted. Later, during the interrogation, Danielle said that something unexpected happened in early October 2016. Her husband tried to run her over with a car. Only by jumping into the bushes did the woman save her life. After this incident, she even went to the police station. But when the detectives began to pry into the details, Danielle simply turned around and left. The reason was the same as always. Eventually, the couple managed to reconcile, and they lived together again under the same roof. As it turned out, this decision proved fatal for them. Around 9 a.m., on January 12, 2019, a call came in to 911. At the other end of the line, a woman introduced herself as Danielle Redley and reported that her husband Michael had just died of a heart attack. When the paramedics arrived on the scene, even before crossing the threshold of the house, they smelled a strong odor of cleaning products, and in the hallway, they came across a bucket of watercolor pink. Further on, a scene worthy of a thriller unfolded before them. In the middle of the living room, in a pool of blood, lay a lifeless body. It became clear that the man had not died of a heart attack, as his wife had claimed, but from a stab wound. The woman who made the call was found with cuts on her wrists. Paramedics provided her with first aid before taking her to the hospital, and the police, meanwhile, began investigating this case. After examining the crime scene, law enforcement had no doubt that Michael Redley's life had been violently ended. It was unlikely that he had inflicted such a fatal wound on himself. Later, forensic experts confirmed that the blood in the house belonged to the deceased, and the pink liquid in the bucket turned out to be the same blood, only diluted. Apparently, someone, possibly the mistress of the house herself, had tried to destroy the bloody trail that led from the bedroom to the living room, pretending that the body had been dragged. But despite all efforts to clean up, the evidence could not be completely destroyed. There were splatters of blood in the corners of the room and on the walls, and at the entrance to the kitchen lay a large knife, while 3 smaller ones were found in the sink. The detectives were eager to question Danielle, so as soon as the medics certified that her injuries were not life-threatening, the woman was taken in for questioning. During questioning, she repeatedly changed her testimony. At first, she claimed that she thought her husband had died of heart disease. Later, she stated that he had taken his own life after an argument. However, experts refuted her claims. Such a wound is difficult to self-inflict, and people who intend to end their lives usually choose an easier and less painful method. The autopsy showed that Michael died from blood loss. With timely medical attention, his life could have been saved. In addition, his left eye was slashed. Toxicology tests also revealed a high level of alcohol in his system. The investigation showed that a few days before the incident, there had been an argument between the couple, witnessed by their older daughter. Michael had been drinking and barged into the bathroom where Danielle was hiding. However, their daughter Jadden intervened, taking the bottle away from him. After that, Danielle left the house and returned when her husband fell asleep. According to the girl, this was the first time she had seen such an outburst of anger from her father, for which he later apologized repeatedly. She still maintained that he was a loving and caring father, while at the same time insisting that her mother was the instigator of conflicts. The next day, the couple reconciled. Michael invited his wife and children to a football game. However, according to witnesses, Danielle looked upset and hardly spoke. That evening, the parents dropped the kids off at friends for a sleepover and were left alone. Later, Danielle went to McDonald's and returned home around 10:30 p.m. Upon entering the house, she found her husband drunk. During dinner, Danielle received a message from an unknown man. Michael saw this, bit off a piece of his hamburger and spat it at his wife. He then attacked her, trying to strangle her. In self-defense, Danielle grabbed the first thing she could, a knife, and plunged it into his chest. He fell and began bleeding profusely. According to the defendant, she immediately called for emergency help, but mistakenly dialed the wrong number. Her actions were later confirmed during the investigation. In a state of shock, she lay down next to Michael and fell asleep until morning. At least, that's how Danielle explained the 11 hours of inaction. When asked by the prosecution why she had lied during the emergency call and subsequent interrogations, Mrs. Redley explained that she was afraid. She worried that no one would believe she had acted in self-defense. There were reasons for this fear. Shortly before the incident, she had gotten into an altercation with friends. When the police arrived on the scene, she resisted, attempting to bite one of them. She also refused to cooperate with the investigation, leading to charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Danielle was on probation for about a year. It was also established that the cuts on her wrists were self-inflicted. She claimed she had attempted suicide due to emotional trauma, but the nature of the injuries suggested otherwise. They were superficial and not life-threatening. Therefore, her claims were not believed. Investigators also found that Danielle was far from a model citizen. Upon learning of Michael's infidelity, she registered on a dating site, where she communicated with men and sought revenge through infidelity. Her profile stated that she was single and not in a relationship. Analysis of countless messages between Michael and Danielle showed that she still loved her husband. When she learned of his infidelities, she felt betrayed and disappointed. She also discovered that Michael planned to leave her, despite appearing remorseful and wanting to restore their relationship. Danielle explained that it was difficult for her to understand and accept her husband's actions. She was heartbroken that she had devoted the best years of her life to someone who did not value her. The prosecution used this information against her. The prosecutor argued that the crime was intentional in a fit of rage, as she could not forgive his infidelity and the impending divorce. Like Mr. Redley, she was also prone to outbursts of anger, as confirmed by their neighbors, who noted that the couple often loudly argued, escalating into physical altercations. However, Michael and Danielle were described differently by those who knew them. Michael was portrayed positively as kind and caring, while Danielle was considered quarrelsome. Video evidence was presented showing the defendant behaving irrationally and attacking her husband. Michael's friends and brother agreed with this. One of them recalled calling her crazy, but reassured him that everything would be fine as long as the steak knives were hidden away. Danielle's attorney argued that her actions were dictated by self-defense and a history of emotional and physical abuse. Relatives, often witnesses to their fights, confirmed that Michael was abusive and emotionally cruel. They also knew that he frequently physically abused and belittled her, though he never did so in their presence. Some family members reported that Danielle was nervous and hot-tempered, but this only manifested after many years of marriage. The prosecution clung to the fact that she essentially left her husband to die, suggesting she was lying in wait. They argued that on the night of the incident she logged into her dating site account, indicating intent driven by hatred, resentment, and possibly even financial gain. After the divorce, Danielle stood to lose a portion of their accumulated wealth. At the time of Michael's death, her assets were valued at $1.2 million. It was also mentioned that she repeatedly changed her testimony, allegedly attempting to confuse the investigation and may have fabricated evidence. However, the defense insisted that Mr. Redley was a manipulator and predator. After the death of his first wife, he relentlessly pursued his stepdaughter and molded the young woman into what he wanted. During the investigation, the prosecution offered the defendant a plea deal for involuntary manslaughter that would have resulted in only 10 years in prison. However, she refused, despite facing the possibility of life in prison if convicted of first or second-degree murder. She continued to insist on her innocence. The outcome of the trial was unexpected for everyone. On July 17, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. They found Danielle Redley not guilty of intentional murder, believing her actions were indeed self-defense. However, they found her guilty of tampering with evidence, for which she received a 5-year suspended sentence. Since she had already served 3 years, they were credited to her. On August 5, 2022, the day the sentence was announced, the defendant was released in the courtroom. Stephanie Flores, an ambitious 21-year-old girl, set off on May 30, 2010 for a prestigious poker tournament at the Atlanta City Casino in Lima, the capital of Peru. Stephanie was confident in her chances of winning. Before leaving, she assured her father that she would return home in a couple of days, but this trip turned out to be fatal. Stephanie never returned. Stephanie lived with her father, Ricardo Flores, a well-known race car driver and presidential candidate in Peru. Their family was highly respected in society. The family had 5 children, 4 sons and the only daughter, Stephanie, who was the youngest and the darling of the entire family. Despite their high social status and significant position, all members of the Flores family were humble and friendly people who valued a simple life. Stephanie's 4 brothers were engaged in organizing various events, and the girl herself, being a third-year student at the University of Lima with a degree in business administration, worked part-time with them. In addition to studying and work, Stephanie was fond of gambling, which brought her a considerable income. When Stephanie did not return home after the poker tournament, her father Ricardo became worried, as this was completely out of character for his responsible daughter. He asked his sons for help, but they also could not contact Stephanie. Then they started calling all her friends, but no one could provide any useful information about the girl's whereabouts. The brothers drove around the entire area looking for their sister, but to no avail. Eventually, Ricardo was forced to file a missing person report with the police. The police began their investigation at the hotel where the poker tournament was held. They interviewed the staff of the establishment, but no one knew where one of the participants had gone. Detectives decided to review the footage from the surveillance cameras and discovered that around 3 o'clock in the morning on May 30, Stephanie entered the conference room where the tournament was being held and sat down at a table next to a young man in light-colored clothing. They chatted nicely during the game and left the room together around 5 in the morning. Hotel employees confirmed that they had seen them together and described Stephanie's companion as a polite and pleasant young man who looked like Hollywood actor Brad Pitt. But where did this couple go after the tournament? The answer to this question was found on other surveillance camera footage. According to them, Stephanie and the stranger entered room 309, registered in the young man's name, at 5:16 a.m. After some time, the man left and returned with 2 cups of coffee and buns, and 3 hours and 20 minutes after their first visit to the room, he left again, taking his backpack with him, and did not return. Before leaving, he asked the hotel staff not to disturb the girl in the room, so no one bothered her until the police arrived. Detectives decided it was time to visit room 309 and check if the girl was okay. But what awaited them behind the door exceeded their worst fears. Opening the room, the police found themselves faced with the horrific scene. Stephanie Flores was lying dead in a pool of her own blood, brutally beaten to death. A tennis racket was seized from the room, which was likely used as the murder weapon. Experts determined that the girl died from a blow to the head with a blunt object, which caused a hemorrhage in the brain. She had a broken neck, traces of blood flowing from the left side of her head, from her ear and nose. There were also signs of strangulation and blunt trauma to the back of the head and lower neck area. Stephanie was fully clothed and lying on her back. There were no signs of sexual assault, so this motive was immediately dismissed. Investigators were faced with the question: if the murder was not sexually motivated, then what pushed the perpetrator to such a cruel act? Robbery seemed a likely reason, as all of Stephanie's money, credit cards, and jewelry had disappeared from the room. It is known that the girl had a large sum of cash with her, about $15,000, of which $10,000 she had won at the tournament, and another $5,000 her father had given her to buy a new laptop. After examining the crime scene, the detectives already had a prime suspect, the same young man from the surveillance camera footage. During the investigation, it was found out that room 309 was registered in the name of 22-year-old Dutchman Joran van der Sloot. The police decided to dig deeper into the identity of this young man and came across stunning facts from his biography. It turned out that van der Sloot was already on the international wanted list and was a suspect in the case of the disappearance of American student Natalie Holloway. The girl disappeared without a trace while vacationing on the island of Aruba on May 30, 2005. Exactly 5 years before the murder of Stephanie Flores. The alarming coincidences in dates and the similarity of circumstances led the investigation to assume that the Dutchman might be involved in other crimes as well. The capture of the dangerous killer became a priority for Peruvian law enforcement, so they put van der Sloot on the wanted list and threw all their efforts into searching for him. While the hunt for the Dutchman was underway, detectives decided to delve deeper into the case of missing Natalie Holloway to better understand the suspect's personality and possible motives. Here's what they managed to establish. Natalie Holloway was born on October 21, 1986 in Clinton, Mississippi, USA, and was the eldest child in the family. When the girl was 7 years old, her parents divorced, and the children stayed with their mother, although they maintained a warm relationship with their father. At the age of 14, Natalie moved with her family to the city of Mountain Brook in Alabama, where her mother entered into a second marriage with a wealthy businessman. The girl was an excellent student at school, was engaged in cheerleading and dancing. After graduating from high school with honors, Natalie received a full scholarship to the university. It seemed that brilliant prospects were opening up for her, but a fateful trip to the island of Aruba in May 2005 forever crossed out all her plans and dreams. Natalie Holloway, an 18-year-old high school graduate, set off on her dream vacation to the island of Aruba, a paradise corner of the Caribbean Sea that is part of the Netherlands. Aruba, along with other islands in the region, is known as the Dutch Caribbean and is famous for its safety and extremely low crime rate. The trip was organized by the school specifically for graduates who were celebrating the end of their studies. In May 2005, a group of 124 students and 11 teachers arrived on the island, full of enthusiasm and anticipation of an unforgettable adventure. The vacation was going perfectly. The group stayed at the luxurious Holiday Inn Hotel on an all-inclusive basis. On Aruba, alcohol consumption is allowed from the age of 18, so young people had the opportunity to fully enjoy exotic drinks. Each day was filled with carefree leisure vacationers enjoyed the beach, swimming in the crystal clear blue waters, lively conversations and jokes. After a hearty lunch, someone could afford a luxurious afternoon nap. In the evening, the whole company gathered for dinner, and then went to the casino or bar to taste various cocktails, including alcoholic ones. May 29, 2005 was the last day of the vacation. It was no different from the previous ones, except that everyone began packing their suitcases before departure. Natalie, like the rest, packed her things, put her passport next to her suitcase, and went to dinner. After the meal, some continued to have fun, while others returned to their rooms to get a good night's sleep before the morning flight. On the morning of May 30, students and teachers gathered in the lobby of the Holiday Inn Hotel to check out and head to the airport. But the teachers noticed the absence of one student. After checking the lists, they found that Natalie Holloway was missing. No one in the group knew where she could be. At first, the teachers assumed that the girl might have overslept and called her room, but there was no answer. Then they went to her room with a hotel employee and opened the door. To their surprise, Natalie was not there, although her suitcase with her belongings and passport remained in the room. The entire hotel staff and teachers started searching for the girl, scouring every corner of the property, but to no avail. Around 11 a.m., one of the teachers called Natalie's mother and reported the girl's disappearance. The woman asked if Natalie could have gone somewhere alone, but the mother was sure that her daughter would never have done that. She immediately suggested that the girl had been kidnapped. All students and teachers were in a state of shock at the time, as they knew Natalie as a very responsible person and understood that she could not have disappeared without a trace and not tell anyone. Something terrible must have happened to her. The teachers immediately contacted the police, reporting Natalie's disappearance, and continued the search together with law enforcement. Meanwhile, the rest of the students, along with several teachers, were forced to fly home. The missing girl's mother, gripped by panic and despair, immediately called her husband and Natalie's biological father, giving them the terrible news. Without wasting a minute, they all together took the first flight from a neighboring city and flew to Aruba, hoping to find their daughter as soon as possible. In addition, the woman sought help from 911 and the FBI, describing the situation to them in detail. As soon as they set foot on Aruban soil, Natalie's relatives immediately plunged into the search, questioning everyone who might have seen the girl at the hotel or resort. They handed out photos of the missing girl and actively cooperated with the investigation from the very beginning. During the investigation, a stunning discovery was made. Natalie did not spend the night in her hotel room on the night of her disappearance. Moreover, no one saw her at the hotel that night at all. However, some of her friends recalled seeing Natalie talking to a tall guy of European appearance, probably Dutch, in the casino adjacent to the hotel. They suggested that the girl could have gone somewhere with him. Casino security guards reported that around 1 o'clock in the morning, when the establishment was closing, they saw Natalie leave and get into a silver Honda with 3 young men. Employees recognized these guys as they often visited the casino. They turned out to be 17-year-old Dutchman Joran van der Sloot, 21-year-old Deepak Kalpo, and his younger 18-year-old brother Satish Kalpo. After watching the surveillance camera footage, the police were convinced of the truthfulness of the guards' words. The footage clearly showed Natalie sitting at the same table with Joran, and then all four of them leaving the casino together. Some employees of the establishment described van der Sloot as a real womanizer who hunted for young wealthy female tourists in order to swindle money from them. At the time of the events, Joran was only 17 and lived in Aruba with his parents. The young man came from a well-to-do family. His father was a successful lawyer and was preparing to become a judge. Joran himself was considered a promising athlete, an excellent student, and everyone predicted a brilliant football career for him. But from his teenage years, he began to have problems with behavior. The young man became a regular at bars and casinos and excessively indulged in alcohol. All leads pointed to this Dutch youth, so Natalie's parents, along with the police, went to his house to interrogate him. The silver Honda, in which the missing girl was last seen, was parked near the house. Joran's father opened the door. When the police informed him of the suspicions against his son, the man replied that the young man had gone to the casino at another hotel. Law enforcement officers immediately went there, hoping to catch Joran, but he had already disappeared without a trace. While everyone was busy looking for the young Dutchman, his father called the police and reported that his son had just returned home with his friend Deepak. When the police arrived at the scene, they decided to immediately separate the young men and interrogate them separately. It turned out that their testimonies not only contradicted each other, but also constantly changed. At first, both claimed that they had never seen the missing girl at all. But when investigators showed them the surveillance footage, which clearly showed them communicating with Natalie, Joran suddenly remembered that he had indeed met her that evening. According to him, after playing at the casino, the girl asked him to go to a nightclub with her. Joran agreed and invited two friends Deepak and his brother Satish. They got into the car together and went to the club, where they had a great time over cocktails and dancing. After that, according to the Dutchman, they drove Natalie back to the hotel and never saw her again. However, at the end of the conversation, Joran let slip that he saw a hotel security guard allegedly pestering the girl when she returned to her room. However, the police immediately realized that this version of events was a complete lie. They had already thoroughly studied all the surveillance camera footage and knew for certain that Natalie did not return to the hotel that night. Investigators repeatedly arrested the suspects for giving false testimony, but due to lack of evidence, they were released each time without charges being brought. During further interrogations, the young men changed their story. Now they claimed that after the nightclub, they all went together to the lighthouse to look at sharks, and then decided to take a walk on Arashi Beach. According to Joran, Natalie was so drunk that she could barely stand on her feet and kept falling, so he allegedly left her alone on the beach because the next morning he had to get up early for classes. The Dutchman assured that the girl did not mind, as she wanted to go all out on the last night. He allegedly had no idea what could have happened to her after he left. However, according to him, now, looking back, he deeply regretted leaving Natalie there alone, because it seemed to have led to her disappearance. Van der Sloot categorically denied having intimate relations with Natalie, claiming that there was only a kiss between them. On the other hand, his friends said that the Dutchman had actually had fun with the girl and then left her to fend for herself on the beach. The police thoroughly searched the beach in question, but found no trace of the missing girl. However, soon one of the gardeners of a neighboring hotel approached law enforcement with new information. The man reported that on the night Natalie disappeared, he saw Joran, Deepak, and Satish digging a hole near a pond in a vacant lot. Investigators immediately rushed to the specified location, even drained the pond, dug up the entire area, but found nothing suspicious. Weeks and then months passed, but no one was charged. Natalie remained missing. Her family expressed increasing dissatisfaction with the course of the investigation and accused the local police of incompetence. The girl's loved ones were convinced that Joran was involved in her disappearance and that he should have been pressured to confess. But the police never did that. The Holloway family even announced a reward of $100,000 for information about Natalie's whereabouts, and also promised $1 million to anyone who would help find her alive. Local residents began calling en masse, sharing their guesses and assumptions, in the hope of receiving the promised money. But all these leads turned out to be false. The police, in turn, accused the girl's parents of the fact that their initiative with the reward only harmed the investigation. because it forced the cops to be distracted by unnecessary leads. Meanwhile, Natalie's relatives did not stop trying to find their daughter. They put up posters, handed out flyers, and participated in search operations. The Araban authorities felt incredible pressure from them, as the family demanded that someone be arrested immediately, although there was little evidence for this. During the investigation, Joran van der Sloot, Deepak, and Satish Kalpo even spent 3 weeks in custody. Local residents were already certain that the young men would be charged at any moment, but this never happened. Soon all 3 were released. Deepak and Satish were freed after 3 weeks. Joran spent 2 more months in prison. And then the Kalpo brothers told the police that Joran's father allegedly helped his son hide Natalie's body. The man was detained, but released after only 3 days, as no evidence was found against him. Later, van der Sloot's father, who worked as a lawyer, filed a lawsuit against the Araban police for wrongful detention and won the case, receiving $40,000 in compensation. The disappearance of the American high school student gained incredible publicity in the United States media, which greatly worried the Araban authorities, as the island lived off tourists from the USA. The case became so high profile largely due to the persistence of Natalie's parents, who did not stop demanding justice for their daughter and in every possible way tried to stir up the local police. However, Joran himself also added fuel to the fire. For hefty fees, he willingly participated in various talk shows on American television, where he talked about the details of his meeting with Natalie on that fateful night. The young man assured that he was only telling the truth and had nothing to do with the girl's disappearance. A year after the incident, van der Sloot returned to the Netherlands and continued his studies. In numerous interviews with local media, he claimed that they were trying to frame him, and time after time repeated his version of events. Allegedly, he left Natalie Holloway on the beach that night and went home, and therefore was not responsible for her disappearance. Together with a journalist, Joran even published a book about this case, where he detailed his story and proved his own innocence. The young man made a pretty penny on all this. Under pressure from the missing girl's parents, the Araban police nevertheless dared to conduct searches in the van der Sloot's house and the surrounding area. Law enforcement officers thoroughly checked every nook and cranny, even dug up the yard, but found nothing that could shed light on Natalie's fate. The investigation of this case was under close attention of the media and the public in many countries of the world, especially in the USA, Aruba, and the Netherlands. Joran became a real media star. Interestingly, opinions about him were divided. Some considered him the main suspect in Holloway's disappearance, while others saw him as an innocent victim of slander. Meanwhile, van der Sloot continued to participate in various television shows. During one of them, unable to withstand the pressure of the hosts and the sharp questions of the audience, he threw a glass of drink right in the journalist's face. 3 years had passed since Natalie's disappearance when new details emerged in this case. One of the witnesses claimed that on that night, around 4 a.m., he saw Joran and his father near the pond. According to him, the young man ran up to a fast food restaurant, and a few minutes later, the 2 men got into a red Jeep and drove away somewhere. Another lead was related to van der Sloot's ex-girlfriend. She told the police how one night Joran said something to her like, "Who knows, maybe now you're lying on the beach next to someone who is able to get rid of a corpse." The girl was horrified by these words and believed that an innocent person would never have said such a thing. But despite all these testimonies, suspicious coincidences, and changing statements of the suspects, the Araban police never managed to find enough evidence to charge anyone. The cases against Joran van der Sloot, Deepak, and Satish Kalpo were closed. Investigators promised to reopen the proceedings only if new significant facts emerged. In the end, no one was ever charged in connection with the disappearance of Natalie Holloway. Joran seemed to be reveling in his impunity and infamous fame. And in 2008, something unexpected happened. A video appeared on the internet, made with a hidden camera, in which van der Sloot told journalists about the circumstances of Natalie's death. Allegedly, they had sex on the beach, and then the girl suddenly began to shake and lost consciousness. Then Joran asked his friends to help take her body out to sea by boat and dump it overboard. Later, another scandalous recording appeared on the web, in which van der Sloot literally gloated over the fact that Natalie's body was never found. "Otherwise, I would have been fried," he bragged, hinting that someone had helped him cover up the traces of the crime. But most amazingly, all these revelations had no legal consequences for him. The Araban police refused to accept his confession in front of a hidden camera as evidence, claiming that it was not enough for trial. Allegedly, without a body and physical evidence, it was impossible to hold Joran accountable. Investigators suggested that with his sensational statements, van der Sloot was simply trying to create scandalous fame for himself and make money. Therefore, he made up all these gruesome stories. For some time, Joran even underwent treatment in a psychiatric clinic where he turned of his own free will, and soon he moved to Bangkok, the capital of Thailand. There, with the money earned from interviews and the sale of the book, the young man bought a small restaurant and set about developing his business. That same year, another journalist met with van der Sloot, who was then living in Thailand. In a conversation with her, Joran said that he had sold Natalie Holloway into sexual and shared the proceeds with the Kalpo brothers, who allegedly helped him in this scheme. He also admitted that he was involved in the transfer of Thai women to the Netherlands, where they too were destined to become sex slaves. According to him, he managed to earn up to $30,000 on each victim. However, as soon as the interview was over, van der Sloot called the journalist and stated that he was just joking. Such inadequate antics by Joran did not go unnoticed by the local authorities. After the interview, the Thai police took an interest in him in connection with the voiced information about human trafficking and began an investigation. To avoid trouble with the law, van der Sloot was forced to flee the country, abandoning his restaurant business and savings. However, he later managed to sell his establishment in Bangkok remotely. Shortly thereafter, Joran's father died of a heart attack. The young man took the loss very hard, feeling guilty for his father's untimely death. Due to a nervous breakdown, he again found himself in a psychiatric hospital. Accidentally, after being discharged, van der Sloot's financial situation became extremely difficult. Desperately in need of money, he came up with another insidious plan. In 2019, the Holloway family's lawyer reported that an anonymous person had contacted him and offered a deal. The unknown person demanded $250,000 for information about the location of Natalie's remains. At the same time, the criminal asked for $25,000 in advance. During the investigation, it turned out that none other than Joran van der Sloot was behind these messages. To expose the scammer, Natalie's father agreed to a meeting and brought the agreed amount to Aruba. During the conversation, Joran gave another version of the events of that fateful night. Allegedly, he and Natalie had a fight, he pushed her, and the girl, falling, hit her head on a stone and died instantly. And then Joran, together with his father, buried the body in the foundation of one of the houses. Van der Sloot insisted that everything happened by accident and he was not to blame for anything. He even showed the place where Natalie's body was allegedly hidden. But when the police checked his words, it turned out that this was another lie. The house that Joran was talking about was built even before the girl's disappearance, so her remains could not have ended up under it in any way. And shortly after the meeting, Natalie's father received an email from the blackmailer, in which he admitted that the story with the house was a fiction. In order to bring van der Sloot to justice, if not for murder, then at least for extortion and fraud, the Holloway family involved the FBI in the case. Finally, official charges were brought against the Dutchman. But as soon as Joran found out about this, he fled to Peru. It was there that the tragedy with Stephanie Flores occurred. On June 3, 2010, van der Sloot's ex-girlfriend called the police. She reported that the fugitive had just contacted her and asked to borrow money for a plane ticket. Thanks to this information, the cops managed to track down Joran. He was detained in Chile, where he had arrived from Peru in 2 taxis. He was just about to board a plane, but did not have time. During the arrest, the police noticed that the suspect's clothes were stained with blood. Obviously, while fleeing, he did not have time to change. Soon, Joran van der Sloot was extradited from Chile to Peru, where he was charged with the murder of Stephanie Flores. At the very first interrogation by the police, the arrestee resolutely denied his guilt. According to his version, armed robbers burst into the hotel room, stole all the valuables, and shot the girl, and he allegedly managed to escape from the criminals alive. Joran explained the blood of Stephanie on his clothes by the shooting that took place in the room. But the police did not believe this story. Surveillance camera footage refuted the presence of armed robbers in the hotel. Moreover, none of the staff or guests heard any sounds of shooting. But most importantly, forensic experts established that Stephanie Flores died not from a bullet, but from a blow with a blunt object. So, 4 days after his arrest, van der Sloot nevertheless confessed to the crime. As Joran recounted, a friendly conversation struck up between him and Stephanie in the room. But suddenly he noticed that the girl, without permission, looked into his laptop, where a page was open with a mention of the disappearance of Natalie Holloway and van der Sloot's possible involvement in this. the young man rushed to convince Stephanie that all these suspicions were unfounded, that he was in no way connected with the Holloway case and was not to blame for anything. But the frightened girl did not believe him. She hit Joran in the face and rushed to the door, intending to escape. This attempt caused a fit of furious rage in him. The enraged Van der Sloot attacked Stephanie. First, he hit her in the face with his elbow, breaking her nose. Then he grabbed the girl by the throat and began to strangle her. There was blood everywhere, including on his shirt. Then Joran took off his bloody shirt and threw it over Stephanie's face, pressing the fabric to her mouth. When the girl's body finally went limp and she stopped showing signs of life, the attacker came to his senses. According to Van der Sloot, he deeply regretted what he had done and blamed alcohol and the actions of the victim herself, who allegedly provoked him. He said he feared that Stephanie would bring the police down on him, so he acted under the influence of emotions. He simply could not control himself and prevent the threat that the girl posed to him. However, investigators adhered to a simpler explanation. In their opinion, Joran could have killed Flores for selfish motives, since money and jewelry disappeared from the room. Realizing that he faced a severe sentence in Peru, Van der Sloot tried to make a deal with the investigation. He offered to indicate the burial place of Natalie Holloway's remains in exchange for dropping the charges of Stephanie's murder. But the prosecutors refused to bargain. The trial of Joran Van der Sloot in the case of the murder of Stephanie Flores went rather quickly, since all the evidence pointed to his guilt. The prosecution provided surveillance camera footage that captured the defendant entering the hotel room with the victim and a few hours later leaving it alone. Traces of the dead girl's blood were found on Joran's wrists and on Stephanie's body itself and on the murder weapon. Experts found the Dutchman's DNA. Van der Sloot's lawyer understood the hopelessness of the situation, so she advised her client to plead guilty in exchange for leniency from the court. She hoped that in this way he would be able to get away with 15 years in prison. But despite the confession, Joran was sentenced to 28 years in prison. In addition, the court ordered him to pay compensation to the family of the deceased in the amount of $75,000. Dissatisfied with the severity of the sentence, Van der Sloot later stated that he confessed to the murder under pressure from his defense counsel and the police, who allegedly forced him to take the blame. Also, during the hearings, it was decided that after serving his sentence in Peru, Joran would be extradited to the United States, where he would be tried for fraud and extortion of money from the Holloway family. In 2014, while behind bars, Van der Sloot met a 33-year-old Peruvian citizen named Lady Figueroa. The woman made a living selling sweets and cigarettes to prisoners. A romantic relationship began between her and Joran, which soon grew into a marriage. The couple later even became parents to a girl, whom they named Trudy Van der Sloot in honor of the convict's late grandmother. According to the rather liberal rules of the Peruvian penitentiary system, Figueroa could visit her husband twice a week. In interviews with the press, she described Joran as a kind and sensitive person. However, already in 2020, Van der Sloot demanded a divorce. As it turned out, he had made the acquaintance of another woman, 24-year-old Eva. This young woman was involved in the smuggling of prohibited substances into the prison, which attracted Joran. When the prisoner's machinations became known, he was given an additional 7 years for the distribution of narcotic drugs. Also, Van der Sloot was transferred to a more strict regime colony, where visits from relatives were prohibited. Since then, Joran has been maintaining relationships with Eva and other women only through correspondence. It is noteworthy that the Dutchman was never charged in the case of the missing Natalie Holloway. Her fate still remains unclear, although the family is convinced that it was Van der Sloot who was involved in the girl's death. The residents of Aruba were convinced that 3 young men were involved in the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, Joran Van der Sloot, and the brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. This company gained a dubious reputation as hunters for the money of wealthy American female tourists, whom they skillfully deceived. Joran was considered the leader in this trio because he spoke English fluently, had an attractive appearance, and knew how to establish contact with the opposite sex. The Kalpo brothers usually played the role of secondary assistants in his adventures. The family of the deceased Natalie is inclined to believe that the girl became a victim of just such a scam. Van der Sloot probably planned to swindle money from her, but something went wrong. Perhaps Natalie refused to give up cash or valuables, so the robbery fell through. And during the quarrel, the irreparable happened: the girl died. Fearing responsibility, the criminals got rid of the body. Most likely, they threw the dead Natalie into the ocean to feed the sharks. However, it is possible that everything was much more sinister. and we are talking about the intentional murder of Miss Holloway. The suspicions of the deceased American's family only intensified after the terrible incident with Stephanie Flores. After all, the circumstances of these two tragedies are very similar. Joran met both girls in a casino, spent time with them, and then killed them. At first, the Peruvian authorities agreed to extradite van der Sloot to the United States only after he had fully served his prison term for the murder of Stephanie. But in May, the Peruvian side changed its decision. They allowed Joran to be temporarily handed over to American justice, given the advanced age of the prosecution witnesses, who may not live to see the end of the Dutchman's sentence. As noted, this process should bring long-awaited peace to the life of the Holloway family, which grieves for Natalie in the same way as the Flores family does for Stephanie. Van der Sloot himself was categorically against extradition, and even tried to challenge this decision through a lawyer, referring to the fact that he was not notified about it in advance. However, his petition was rejected. At the end of May 2023, Joran was brutally beaten by other inmates in a Peruvian prison. In early June, FBI agents arrived to pick him up. To transport the suspect to the States, American law enforcement officers used one of their agency's official planes. On June 8, 2023, the aircraft with van der Sloot on board landed in the USA. Joran was placed in a federal correctional facility in the city of Birmingham, located not far from the hometown of the missing Natalie Holloway. So far, there is no information about the exact date of the start of the trial in the Dutchman's case. The inhabitants of the island of Aruba were convinced that 3 young men were involved in the disappearance of Natalie Holloway, Joran van der Sloot, and the brothers Deepak and Satish Kalpo. This company gained notoriety as hunters for the money of wealthy American female tourists, whom they skillfully deceived. Joran was considered the leader in this trio since he spoke English fluently, had an attractive appearance, and knew how to establish contact with members of the opposite sex. The Kalpo brothers usually played the role of secondary assistants in his adventures. The family of the deceased Natalie tends to believe that the girl became a victim of just such a scam. Probably, van der Sloot planned to swindle money from her, but something went wrong. Perhaps Natalie refused to give away cash or valuables, so the robbery fell through. And during the quarrel, the irreparable happened: the girl died. Fearing responsibility, the criminals got rid of the body. Most likely, they threw the dead Natalie into the ocean to feed the sharks. However, it is possible that everything was much more sinister, and we are talking about the intentional murder of Miss Holloway. The suspicions of the American victim's family only intensified after the terrible incident with Stephanie Flores. After all, the circumstances of these two tragedies are very similar. Joran met both girls in a casino, spent time with them, and then killed them. Initially, the Peruvian authorities agreed to extradite van der Sloot to the United States only after he had fully served his prison term for the murder of Stephanie. But in May, the Peruvian side changed its decision. They allowed Joran to be temporarily handed over to the American justice system, given the advanced age of the prosecution witnesses who may not live long enough to see the end of the Dutchman's sentence. As noted, this process should bring long-awaited peace to the lives of the Holloway family, who grieve for Natalie in the same way as the Flores family does for Stephanie. Van der Sloot himself was categorically against extradition and even tried to challenge this decision through a lawyer, citing the fact that he was not notified about it in advance. However, his petition was rejected. At the end of May 2023, Joran was brutally beaten by other inmates in a Peruvian prison. In early June, FBI agents arrived to take him into custody. To transport the suspect to the States, American law enforcement officers used one of their agency's official planes. On June 8, 2023, the aircraft with van der Sloot on board landed in the USA. Joran was placed in a federal correctional facility in the city of Birmingham, located not far from the hometown of the missing Natalie Holloway. Currently, there is no information about the exact date of the start of the trial proceedings in the Dutchman's case.